you've got tables, you've got indexes, you've got joins for the foreign key relationships, and you've got constraints. You've got all these business rules and all of this database structure that we've been using for the last 20, 30 years that people know it's tried and true. It delivers, it performs. And the first few versions of cloud databases were basically throwing all of that experience out the window and just making big buckets of data.
Gotcha.
What Microsoft's done with SQL Azure is basically gone against the current a little bit. That is saying, hey, just have buckets out in the cloud, and they're doing full relational database out in the cloud. So you can have a database that you have locally, and you can just decide that you want to move it out to the cloud, and save for a few features that aren't going to be in SQL Azure at this point. You can just take your table, move it straight up to a SQL Azure database, and your applications don't need to change. They don't need to be modified. You can just continue to work. You just change the connection string for your application to a cloud connection string, and you can continue to keep on processing. It's a really nice way to do it. It makes it actually more accessible to move things out to the cloud if you have data that can be moved out that way.
Okay. Now, my next question is for Tim. As a project manager, how do you see cloud computing and SQL Azure complementing your world?
Well, from the standpoint of project management, cloud computing, if you're implementing a cloud computing project, it wouldn't be grossly different than any other project. In 90% or more of the cases, project management methods and tools and approaches can be applied to anything essentially from construction to space travel to Azure-based cloud computing. It doesn't really matter. In terms of how it affects project management, cloud computing is a little more complex from the testing standpoint and can certainly involve other players and other connections, technical connections that have to be factored into the work and communications. But overall, from the effect standpoint, it's really not a great effect. In terms of how it affects us in any other way, I guess I couldn't answer.
Have you been playing with any of the SQL Azure features, or have you had any exposure to it?
I've had very little exposure to it so far, only because performance tuning and dealing with clients has become a big thing for me for the last half of the year. But I've been looking at some of the stuff as it's been coming out, but haven't had any hands-on with it yet.
Can you tell me a few cons and pros?
Well, a few of the pros when it comes to a SQL Azure database is going to be that you don't necessarily need to have your database administrators managing the server. You're not going to, if you're a smaller shop and you don't have all the resources to manage servers and keep track of uptime, and you've got one or two developers that are developing the database and doing all that stuff, SQL Azure allows you to go with this service-based database offering so that somebody else can take care of all the nuts and the bolts and making sure that you get performance, making sure that you keep it up and going, making sure that all of those infrastructure pieces are taken care of. And then that way the small business can continue to work on the things that it's good at. So if you get a bunch of marketing guys and they're pretty much good at marketing, but they need a database solution, SQL Azure allows them to start to access that kind of stuff without them having to expand into areas that they're just not really comfortable in dealing with. Mm-hmm. Now, that's on the pros side. And then when you're dealing with larger companies, they'll realize some of the same benefits. If they've got smaller services that they want to bring up and ramp up really quickly, or if it's getting to be the Christmas time of the year and they want to ramp up and have 1,000 servers so that they can process all the Christmas orders, and then after Christmas they want to scale back down. When you're going with a services-based offering, you can really easily do that. All you do is expand your service contract with the cloud computing vendor. Right now, SQL Azure is basically being hosted only by Microsoft, but they're looking at over the long term that they'll be pushing that out to other ISPs to manage and to run their own clouds.
Okay.
So, during those peak times, they can go out there, they can expand up as much as they need, and they can contract during their slow times. So you don't have to spend money on infrastructure that you're only going to need for a month or two.
I was just going to jump in and say, Rajiv, that's one of the areas where cloud computing testing gets so complex, because whereas if you have the developer company has total control over everything, like they would on a server instantiation, you can scale the test to live within the parameters of scalability that you can expect it to and make sure it all works. But if you're doing the kind of situation, the scaling situation that Jason's talking about, it can get a little hard to predict what the scalability will look like for certain. You have to do testing based on some very good assumptions, and that's about it at the highest and widest amounts of scalability.
Yeah, so those are some of the pros that go with SQL Azure and cloud computing. Some of the cons when you're looking at the database side is, can you even put the data out there in this kind of a context? Can you put out healthcare information out into the cloud? What's the security requirements, and how does HIPAA match up with what's available in the cloud and the data access that's out there? Some of those questions really haven't been answered yet. And they're really going to have to wait until the law catches up to the technology.
Jason, if I can break in one more time here, the FCC is, and the FTC, in fact, are both working jointly on a series of regulation that's basically going to better identify what data can go out, what sensitive consumer data can go out over all of the networks that are available in a cloud situation in that same vein. So that regulation is being worked on right now, in fact.
Yeah, and until that's done, it's really kind of an open question. Can you put out medical information? And if you do, who's got access to it? If you put out, credit card information, is it going to be encrypted to PCI compliance? I think right now a lot of those questions are leaning more towards we don't know, and so that's too much of a risk. But if you're doing something where you've got like a basket where you're filling up with product, so you fill the basket